Welcome to Bletchley Park, home of the British Codebreakers during the war, and one of the very best kept secrets of the war. It wasn't until 1976 that we even knew the work going on here. In a few moments, we're going to meet David Kenyon, who is a researcher and historian here, and can tell us what this place is all about. Because behind me is the bomb machine. Think of it as a mechanical computer, and it was invented by one Alan Turing, and we'll hear a lot more about him in the next few minutes. An extraordinary machine that accelerated the end of the war, saved thousands of lives. It's a wonderful story. Let's find out more about it. David Kenyon, you're the research historian here at Bletchley. That must be, given this place's history, the most fantastic job.
It's a wonderful job. I've been here for nearly 10 years now, and essentially they pay me money to read books about World War II. So as a lifelong military historian, it's a fantastic role to have.
And to poke around this place, and you must discover little stories, little things that nobody's known before.
Absolutely, and it's not so much even poking around here, but a lot of the archive is in the National Archives in London, and that material has only been declassified gradually. Although the secret came out initially in the late 1970s, the paperwork has taken a while to catch up. So me and our other researcher Tom are still reading things that potentially nobody has bothered to look at before. So
yeah, there must be so much as well. But I'm staggered, and I think most people will be, that this place was a very well kept secret during the war, but remained so for another 20 odd years, 30 years nearly.
It did, yes, and it's a bit of a misconception. People think that there's a 30-year rule, if you like. Actually, the government's allowed to keep things secret as long as they want. But and they probably would have, but it was only because the story started to leak in the United States and in France that in the late 70s they decided that they would cough up what had been going on.
And what had been going on? How did it all start? How did Codebreakers come to this magnificent English country house?
Well, it's a kind of long, winding story. Codebreaking, of course, trying to read your enemy's messages goes back to the Tudor times, the Napoleonic Wars, whatever. But in terms of what was going on here, the real change comes with the invention of wireless in the turn of the 20th century, because, of course, as soon as you start transmitting things by wireless, anyone can listen to them.
Yes.
And so you then have to encrypt them. And British codebreaking, wireless codebreaking, starts in World War I. Then in 1919, the government, obviously, they're scaling back after World War I, so they civilianised them as part of the Foreign Office under the management of the Secret Intelligence Service.
So presumably quite a small team then? Yes,
I mean, there's only probably 50 kind of senior code breakers and then another 50 support staff. So it's one floor of MI6's headquarters, if you like. And they carry on in that vein through most of the 1920s and 1930s. And it's only as World War II seems imminent that the organisation, they plan to grow, and indeed they start to grow at that point.
What sort of people were they, though? They were intelligence officers, people like that?
Mostly at that period, the early recruits are mostly academics. They're linguists, typically, rather than mathematicians. And actually their recruitment system is very much the old boy networks, with the emphasis on boys as well. Most of them are men. There are one or two women who stand out from the pre-war period, but they're the exception rather than the rule. So
at what stage did somebody think, we'll send them to Bletchley Park? I mean, how did they even find this place? Who owned it?
Well, it starts in 1937 because bombing starts in the Spanish Civil War, aerial attacks on cities, and Guernica, of course, very famous. So the climate in the late 1930s is that potentially a war is coming with Germany, Italy, and that if that war breaks out, it will be a bomber war, and horror stories are told about how London will be destroyed within hours from the air, which is actually nonsense. The technology isn't mature enough to do that yet. But the government comes up with evacuation plans for everybody, all the organs of government. So everybody from the Prime Minister and the Royal Family right down to kind of the Department of Work and Pensions.
So all the important people are to be taken out of London and into the country.
And into the countryside. And they send civil servants out with rail warrants to holiday towns that they think will have a lot of B&B accommodation.
Yeah.
As part of that plan, Admiral Sinclair, who was head of SIS and thus head of the Codebreakers at GCNCS, needs to find what he calls a war station for his Codebreakers. And it happens at that point that Bletchley Park is available. So he bought the place as a home, as a war station for his Codebreakers and for some other bits of SIS. The first time anybody comes here is during the Munich crisis in 1938. September 38, there is fear that there's going to be a war. There wasn't a war. So the Codebreakers arrive at Bletchley Park in September and they stay for about 6 weeks.
Oh.
And when the drama settles down, they'll go back to London again. But it served as a really useful sort of training opportunity. Sometimes it gets described as a rehearsal, but they were expecting a war. It wasn't a rehearsal. It was a real deployment. It just turned out to be a rehearsal. You know? But they learnt a lot of lessons. For example, they packed up all their documents into tea chests and shipped everything here. And when they arrived, they discovered they didn't have any bookshelves. So they had to put all their files in piles on the floor. So it's these simple things that people forget, you know. Also, 100-odd staff, somebody was told to find them all places to stay.
Yes, that's right. I mean, there can't be that many bedrooms.
Well, nobody stayed on site. So they were all put into hotels and guest houses and pubs and things in the area. But unfortunately, the person who did that started alphabetically. And so the people whose names began with A got the nice hotels, and the people whose names began with W got the grotty pubs. And this didn't necessarily reflect the seniority of the individuals concerned. So they had to rectify that next time.
Yes, so it shows that rehearsals are well done.
They also brought a chef from the Savoy with them to cook their meals.
Gosh,
You know,
it was another world almost.
It was. It was reckoned that Codebreakers should start at 10 o'clock in the morning. And have a long lunch break, because obviously it was hard work and you didn't want to overtax them. I mean, this goes completely out the window. Once you have an actual war,
Yes.
these people are working 24 hours a day, obviously. But yes, it was quite a genteel start.
So when they first did come for a proper war, as it were, had the war actually started when they really did come and populate?
No,
this place?
they start arriving. The first deployment in 1939 is in August. It's a couple of weeks before. So people start turning up. But what's crucial is that Alistair Denniston, who's the head of the Government Code and Cipher School, so head of the code-breaking operation, again, back in 1937, 1938, he is preparing his organisation for war. And he gets permission from the Foreign Office to expand, to recruit another 50 people, what he refers to as men of a professor type.
Professor type.
Yes, and he goes through his social networks to the universities. By the universities, I mean Oxford and Cambridge.
Yes.
And he rounds up people who he thinks will be suitable. And those people go on training courses, just sort of a week or a fortnight, in late 1938, spring of 1939. And this is how, for example, Alan Turing is recruited. He's at King's College, Cambridge at that time. He's approached and then attends a training course in March of 1939. Gord Welshman's another one. So they've got this emergency list, as it's called, of these people that they can summon if the war's going to start. So the existing staff arrive at Bletchley Park and get things set up. And then war breaks out on 3rd of September. And people like Alan Turing, Gordon Welshman and the others arrive on 4th of September. So why not the 3rd? Well, the 3rd was a Sunday. So
you couldn't ask them to give up.
Well, they're civil servants, so they come to work on Monday morning. So on 4th of September, this tranche of recruits turn up. And as I say, most of them have had some inkling of what they're going to be doing.
Yeah, so they know what they're going to be doing. Yeah.
And it means they can kind of hit the ground running in September 39. And then that recruitment process carries on indefinitely after that, really. There's 184 people arrive in September 39. And they don't all fit because the building's not big enough. And also Sinclair sent some other bits of SIS who live upstairs.
Where do they go? Where do they sleep?
Well, they sleep, again, they're billeted in the local community. But this room, for example, the way we've set-dressed it now reflects what most of the mansion would have been like, in the sense that you'd have had 30 or 40 people working in this room.
Yeah, and smoking.
And smoking,
so it would
yes.
have been smoky.
It would have been smoky.
Very busy.
It would have been very busy. And we have oral history testimony of people sorting intercepted messages on the carpet because there weren't enough tables and chairs. So it's still a bit hand to mouth at that point.
Can you tell me, what are the intercepted messages? Are they radio transmissions between, I don't know, various bits of the German army, or, that we're going to send supplies to so-and-so because that's where we're going to be, or things like that? I don't quite understand what sort of transmissions they would be.
It's exactly that. All armed forces need to communicate between their various components. And traditionally, of course, that was done by messenger, but as soon as you've got wireless sets and transportable wireless sets, then everybody gets a radio and everybody chatters away to everybody else. And you need cipher systems so that traffic is secured as much as you can. And so the German Army, the German Air Force, the German Navy, they're all sending wireless messages to each other. And the British Armed Forces are doing the same, the Royal Navy sending signals around the world. So the ether is full of these messages. They're mostly quite short because it's sent by Morse code by hand. So it's somebody tapping on a Morse key. And inevitably, if you want to send War and Peace that way, it's going to take you a long time.
Very long time.
But the Germans in particular, for Enigma, they have a rule that you should only send 250 characters at a time. So it's a bit like a sort of social media post. It's quite a short thing. What I'm often asked by people is, can you give me an example of a really important message that was intercepted? By World War II, it doesn't really work like that. It's more like each message is a jigsaw puzzle piece. Each message is quite short and might contain just the name of an officer or a military unit moving from one place to another, or a train arriving. Little dribs and drabs of information. But the point is, if you can listen to and then read, in the case of Bletchley Park, thousands of those messages a day, then what you start to do is you build up a picture. Yes. When I talk to school children, I say, if I read one of your text messages, what would I know about you? And they go, well, nothing. No. I say, well, what about if I read all your text messages for a month? And that's when the guilt spreads on their face, because they realise that you would actually, it would reveal their whole life. Yes. And that's how it works. It's about collecting these messages in hundreds and thousands, and fitting all those pieces together. And what you end up with is hopefully a complete picture. Yeah,
but that's all right if you can actually read the message. But when it's been encrypted by Enigma, you've got to figure out how to decrypt it at the other end.
You have, yes.
And that's what the biggest challenge here must have been.
Yes, it's one of the big challenges. I mean, the organisation exists because the traffic is encrypted. And the more wireless is used from World War I onwards, the more sophisticated the encryption systems get. And so the cleverer the codebreakers have to get to keep it. It's a kind of arms race between the two, which continues to this day. I mean,
but it's a mixture of intelligence and language, as you say.
And increasingly mathematics. Yes. One of the criticisms that's levelled at Alistair Denniston is that he didn't recruit enough mathematicians initially. But if you look into it, he was well aware of the changes, and people like Turing were recruited specifically because they were mathematicians.
Tell me about Poland, because didn't the visit to Poland, didn't that sort of happen just before war broke out?
It did, and the Polish are absolutely critical in the story of Enigma, because Enigma was actually invented towards the end of the First World War by a German chap called Scherbius, and he was originally going to sell it to banks, insurance companies, post offices. His idea was it was for commercial communications, because like today, people like to have commercial confidentiality in their traffic. So he developed a certain early versions of the machine, which he patented all over the place. So he patented them in the UK, and he offered them to the British government. But the early version he produced wasn't very good, and the British government decided they didn't want one. So Enigma wasn't really a secret at that point. But he died in the late 1920s before he made any money. And then the German government took over the idea and the patents and set up their own manufacturing. They saw its potential. But at the same time, Poland had only regained its independence after the Treaty of Versailles in 1922. And they knew that their country, if the Russians or the Germans had anything to do with it, their country would disappear again very quickly. So they were very keen to understand other people's communications and all sorts of defensive measures. So in 1929, they basically hold a maths exam at Poznan University and find, in particular, 3 brilliant mathematicians. And they are tasked with working on Enigma from basically 1930, 1931 onwards.
So they were working on it, yes, quite early.
Yeah, they were working on it early, and the early versions of the machine are less sophisticated than the ones that were used during the war. So they succeed with some of the early versions of the machine right back in the early 1930s. They're helped by the French, because the French managed to recruit a spy whose brother runs the German signals office for the German army. So he's very useful.
Yeah. So they knew a lot about Enigma.
They knew a lot about Enigma.
At the same time, they knew that probably their country was going to disappear.
Yes.
So did they get a hold of us, or did we get hold of them?
Well, they are communicating with each other, and there is and particularly through the French. German Turing has written a great book called X, Y and Z, because X, Y and Z referred to Britain, France and Poland. And there was a meeting in the spring of 1939 in Paris, and the Codebreakers all turn up, but they don't. There's a lot of it's all a bit cagey. Nobody really wants to tell anybody else what they found out. But in July of 1939, they have another meeting in Warsaw, which is much more successful. And the Polish basically say to the British and the French, this is what we've managed to do. Have this information, it's yours to do what you with. It's quite an interesting episode because Dilly Knox, who's a famous First World War codebreaker, who'd been working for GC&CS throughout the 1920s and 30s, he'd got stuck on German Enigma. He got to a certain point of understanding the machine, but it was a particular component which had letters on it. Until he knew what order the letters were on that particular entry wheel, it's called, he couldn't get any further with the decryption. And so he went to Poland and he said to the Poles, do you know anything about the QWERTY, as he referred to it? And they went, oh yeah, that's fine, we've worked that out. And he said, well, what is it? And they said, well, it goes A, B, C, D, E, F, G.
No.
And the one option he hadn't considered was that it would just be alphabetical. Oh. He thought the Germans would be cleverer than that and it would be something complicated. So Denniston gives a wonderful description of Knox completely losing his temper in the taxi on the way back to the hotel, going, this is terrible.
But how did they go to that meeting in Warsaw?
They went by train.
Well, I suppose they were free to do so, yeah.
They were, and what's remarkable, in just the room next door in Denniston's office, we have his passport from 1939 with the Nazi visa stamps of him and Knox and
If they had known
exactly
what the purpose of his journey was.
Or what he had in his briefcase when he came back.
When he came back. That must have been very dangerous, actually. But I suppose they had no reason to necessarily search him.
Also, they would have had diplomatic passports. They would have had a certain amount of protection. But
so he came back to Bletchley?
They came back initially to London and then moved to Bletchley a couple of weeks later. And with the information they got from the Polish, they were able to develop ways of breaking Enigma within a couple of months. And by January 1940, the first German Air Force Enigma messages are read here at Bletchley Park.
Is there any truth to them, or is it a myth? That one of the, because codebreakers are always looking for something that gives them a key. And that somebody somewhere realised after a while that some of the messages were ending in Heil or Heil Hitler.
It's sort of a myth. What you're talking about is cribs.
Yes.
And this goes back right through the history of codebreaking, that one of the best ways to try and break a code is if you have the ciphertext, the encrypted letters, and you can work out what you think the plain text of the message might be. And then by comparing the two, it tells you a lot about how the code is constructed. And the technique that Alan Turing and Gordon Welshman develop for breaking Enigma, which is used for most of the war, relies absolutely on cribs. Actually, the Heil Hitler crib that you see in the movie is not very common. And it's more often that the introductions to messages are what we call stereotyped. They use standard formats.
Yes.
Military forces all over the world like to speak in very stereotyped and predictable ways. So you'll get a message that says, from so-and-so to so-and-so.
And that's encrypted.
And that's encrypted.
So the from and the to give you a key.
Yeah, they do. There's a famous case that Gordon Welshman describes where there was a wireless operator in North Africa, German wireless operator, and the way you configure the Enigma machine, the key, or part of the key as it's called, is created every day. Every day the operator would come into his office, he'd open up his Enigma machine, he'd swap the rotors around and make adjustments. And that's part of the security, is how the machine is configured. And then he would send his first message of the day at the same time every morning, which said, I've got nothing to report today. Which meant that his messages every day were basically the same. And that was for the particular code radio network that he was on. That was a fantastic crib, because they knew that at the same time every morning he would send basically the same message. And Gordon Welshman jokes about how, they need to leave him alone, because if anybody attacks him, his messages are going to change. Yeah. But it's kind of chicken and egg, because you can only spot those cribs if you understand the traffic. So you need to break some of it in order to know what people are saying, so you know what they're going to say.
Presumably the genius of the people who worked here.
Exactly.
They worked on that.
And it's interesting, I did some work on D-Day, and in the run-up to D-Day, German Army Enigma in France is being read very readily because the Germans are living very routine lives and their communications are very predictable. After the 6th of June, after D-Day, the amount of Enigma that Bletchley Park can break actually drops off because chaos has broken out in the German ranks, and so their messages have become a lot more unpredictable, so the cribs are harder to find. After a couple of weeks, the German army gets itself organised again. They go back to sending stereotyped messages, and the code breaking goes up again.
Tell me about Alan Turing. I mean, he must be the name that everybody asks you about.
He is.
And an extraordinary man.
He's a very interesting man. He's clearly very, very bright. If I had to characterise Turing, he's curious. He's very intellectually curious. He went to Cambridge and then he went to Princeton and did his PhD, all on mathematics. He's not really doing anything particularly cryptographic at that point. He does come up with a cipher system of his own, but it's more about exploring the mathematics of it rather than it being a practical code. He's then enlisted from Cambridge and he comes here, and Dilly Knox, who's the chap who'd been to Poland, he's put in Dilly Knox's team to work on Enigma, and he's given the Enigma problem, essentially. And he goes away up into the attic of a cottage in the stable yard and works particularly on the naval version of Enigma. And the reason he gives is because no one else is looking at it. It's like his own little problem that he can solve. He comes up with a solution. He comes up with what becomes the bomb machines. But what's quite interesting at that point is he kind of goes, well, I've done that, what's next? You know, his mind is always roving onto whatever other problems are out there to be solved. And certainly in the latter half of the war, from sort of 1942 onwards, he becomes a sort of consultant. And if anybody comes across an intractable problem, they'll go, oh, well, ask Turing. And they go off and they find him and go, we've hit this brick wall in whatever we're doing. And he goes, well, leave it with me for a few days. And then he comes back with an answer.
Was he a peculiar man? I mean, you know, a lot of them were a bit eccentric.
I think it used to be, 10 years ago, nerd was an insult. Now nerd is a kind of compliment. We are getting more used to clever people, but there's still an assumption that in order to be brilliant, you also have to be strange.
Yes.
Which isn't necessarily true. And I think sometimes people over-egg how odd Turing may or may not have been.
He was a bit quirky, though,
He was
wasn't
definitely a bit quirky, but equally, I mean, he was a lecturer at Cambridge, he taught students, he went on the BBC in the 1950s, so the idea that he was this sort of inarticulate genius that didn't make any sense to anybody, I think is unfair. The other thing that people forget was he played rugby at school, he rowed at Cambridge, we have some of his rowing trophies. He was a fantastic cross-country runner. It's arguable that he could have qualified for the 1948 Olympics. He had a hip injury in 1948, which meant he didn't run, but his marathon times were quite comparable to other competitors. So in a different world, we might be thinking of him as an Olympic athlete who coincidentally worked at Bletchley. Yeah. But people have this image of him as sort of sitting, the SWAT in the corner. He's not that. He's social, he's athletic, he's, a lot more normal than people give him credit for.
There again there are so many myths, I guess. There's a myth that he bought gold and buried it somewhere in the ground.
He did buy silver, yes. Him and his friend were worried that if Britain got invaded or the war really took a bad turn, the banks would collapse. And they was like, well, what could we do about this? He went out and bought £250 worth of silver ingots, put them in a pram. Because he lived in a pub in Shenley. He put them in a pram and pushed them into Shenley Woods, which was nearby, and buried them. Wrote where he'd buried them in a code of his own devising. And at the end of the war, he went back to get them. But unfortunately, he had some trouble deciphering his own code. He built a metal detector, but he never found it.
He never found his own silver?
No. And some of it he buried under a bridge, and he came back and somebody concreted over the riverbanks. So I've had emails from people saying that, we should go and find Alan Turing's silver. I was like, well, good luck for that. It's got Milton Keynes built on top of it now. So actually, Shenley Woods still survives. So the woods are still there. So his silver is probably still in there, unless somebody's dug it up and not told anyone.
That is a quirky story.
That is a quirky story, yes. There are other aspects. For example, in his office, we've recreated this. He used to keep his tea mug chained to the radiator with a padlock.
Why? Because it would go walkies?
Because it would go walkies, and mugs were scarce. I mean, it makes perfect sense if you think about it. I mean, we all have a mug on our desk in our office, and, you know, if somebody came along and nicked it, you'd be annoyed.
Yes.
So either it's him being an eccentric madman or it's practical good sense. And a lot of the things that he gets accused of, you look at it and you go, well, what would be the literal rational solution to that problem? Like his bike, there was a problem with his bike chain. And a certain number of revolutions would bring a fault in the chain and a fault in the cog together and the chain would fall off. And rather than fix it, he just counted the pedal strokes and worked out how often, the frequency with which it would occur. And every umpteen strokes, he would just pedal a little bit more gently so the chain didn't come off and then speed up again.
My goodness.
Which is the lazy mathematician's solution to a problem. Instead of fixing it, you just work out how to outflank it.
Yeah, but it brings up images of the bomb machine straight away, doesn't it?
Yes, I mean, it's that.
The rotating cogs.
That's it.
Turing is so well known as the leader of the team that basically broke Enigma. Is that true? And how did he do it?
It's partially true. His boss was actually Dilly Knox, but he was one of the lead thinkers. He analysed how the Enigma worked, and he worked out that each letter is encrypted with the Enigma machine in a certain configuration. And the clever part is that when you press the key, the mechanism clicks one place forward. And so if you were to press the same key again, the encryption's changed. So if I press A and get X, if I press A again, I won't get X again, I'll get J or whatever. The encryption is changing for every letter of the message.
And isn't there some staggering statistic about how you could possibly ever work that out?
Yes, if the secret of the security of the machine is that every day you set up most of the components of the machine for what's called the daily key, and then before you send each individual message, you position the 3 or 4 rotors on the top of the machine to a particular starting point. And so those two things in combination, there are 103 sextillion possibilities.
My goodness.
It's a big number.
It is. And no human could work that out.
If you were doing it once a second and you'd started at the birth of the universe, you'd be about 10% of the way through.
Crumbs.
So it's a very big number. But the point is that number isn't created by a single part of the machine. The rotors provide a certain amount of options, and then the plug board creates more options, and the rings on the rotors create more options. So you can reduce the number. If you can solve each stage sort of separately, it divides the number by a huge amount. And what Turing worked out is if you look at what the rotors are doing, they go through 17,000 possibilities each time if you press a key. He worked out that one of the things you really need to know is what position those rotors are in when the message starts. And what the bomb machine does is you need to work out which rotors are in the machine and some of the other aspects of the key by other means. But once you've done that, you can then plug up your bomb machine to replicate the Enigma in that particular configuration. And then you fire it up and it electronically tests all 17,560 positions against all 12 letters simultaneously by creating an electrical circuit. And when the electrical circuit obeys the logic that you've asked it to look for, it does literally what's called a stop. And it stops, and then you can read off the positions of the wheels on the front of the machine.
And he invented that machine?
He invented the mathematical principle behind it. He wasn't really an engineer. By the end of the war, he's kind of taught himself a bit of engineering, but he's really more of a pure mathematician. And one of the things that's misrepresented in the Imitation Game is you see him in a hut with a spanner kind of cranking things. He never really did that. He came up with the mathematical idea, and then GCSS went to a company called British Tabulating Machines. So he and Knox and the team, Peter Twin, came up with the concept of the bomb.
Why did they call it the bomb?
Because the Polish had built a machine previously that they'd called a bomba. Why the Polish called their machine a bomba is a bit obscure. There's various solutions. But Turing, it was an acknowledgement of the Poles' previous effort. And so there's a chap called Doc Keane, who is the chief engineer at British Tabulating Machines in Letchworth. And he is summoned to the White Hart Hotel in Buckingham to meet Peter Twin. They didn't send Turing because they said, Turing won't explain himself very well, we'll send Peter Twin. So Peter Twin went and said, this is the machine we want, basically. And Doc Keane went back to BTM and they built the first machine, which was delivered in March 1940. It didn't work very well, unfortunately, but they persevered. Gordon Welshman suggested some key alterations to the machine, and by August, it breaks its first message. And basically from that point on, they're in.
They knew they were onto something.
They knew they were onto something. And another of the sort of misconceptions is people talk about the bomb singular. Actually, if you want to break thousands of messages, having just one machine isn't really going to help you. By the end of the war, they built over 200 machines.
My goodness. Were they all here?
Only about 10 were here. The rest were, initially they took over other country houses in the local area, Wavendon, Adstock, and then later they built 2 purpose-built centres in North London. The point is, and this is the secret of Bletchley Park's success, is you have someone like Alan Turing who comes up with a solution to your particular code-breaking problem. You then take that solution and industrialise it, basically. You then build a factory to do it. And this is where we come back to the sorts of people that worked at Bletchley, because the perception is that it's all PhD geniuses. Actually, you need a PhD genius to design the factory, and then you need lots of ordinary people to work it.
But they were more than ordinary, though, weren't they? I mean, in recent years, we've seen interviews with very old ladies who were some of the Bletchley girls, and they were clever women. I've noticed around here lots of handbags down on the floor by the desks and everything. I mean, women played a big part in
a massive part.
Here.
I mean, the statistic is that by January 1945, there were 8,995 people in the organisation, of whom 76% were female.
And they weren't just doing support roles either.
No, I mean, what they don't have is a lot of management responsibility. It's the 1940s organisation, it's still basically run by men. But the day-to-day operations of the code-breaking process are done by these thousands of women, many of whom have very tedious jobs, because the code-breaking process is chunked up into a sort of workflow of individual tasks, and people will be recruited and they'd be put in a room and told, do this individual task. And sometimes they didn't even understand the bigger picture. They weren't told the bigger picture. They were just told, do this thing, get this piece of paper.
And keep doing it,
and keep
day in, day out.
And there's doing your homework and never getting it marked. That someone came in with a pile of papers and said, do this. And she went, OK, so she did it. And they came in, took the pile of paper away without a word and just gave her another pile. I mean, that's a bit of an exaggeration, but it wasn't sort of people sitting down with an enciphered message and coming out discovering that they found the Bismarck. It wasn't that straightforward. It was actually a lot duller than that and required
and
a whole
some
chain
of them
of people.
called computers?
Computers, yes,
Computers.
is a term. It's not used so much at Bletchley, but it's certainly a term in the 1930s that a computer is a person. And in particular, for example, for the Manhattan Project, they have huge numbers of computers who are women with adding machines who do the incredibly complicated arithmetic that you need to build a nuclear weapon.
Yeah, they did at NASA as well, didn't they, I think, during
I mean, it's one of the really, I think the movie Hidden Figures was all about that, wasn't it? There's a whole underworld of these people who didn't really get a lot of recognition.
Was Turing basically the father of the computer? A lot of people refer to him in that way.
It depends who you ask. The problem is Turing had some very interesting ideas about computing, and he also worked at Bletchley Park, and the two are not necessarily the same thing. Turing wrote a very famous paper while he was at Cambridge called, the short title is On Computable Numbers, and he was actually tackling a pure mathematical problem about the completeness of mathematics, whether mathematics is always internally logically consistent, which is it's a very abstruse mathematical question. Yes. In order to answer the question, he hypothesized an imaginary machine, the Turing machine as it's called, which was an imaginary device that could be told to do mathematical calculations in various ways. When Turing wrote that, I don't think he was envisioning this ever being a practical device. It was just a thought experiment to support his argument about mathematical completeness. Later on, he's at Bletchley Park and he's involved not only with the bomb machines, but also with Colossus, which is a similarly gargantuan machine that was designed to attack a different cipher system called the Lorentz SZ42, which is another German encryption system. And he was involved in some of the theoretical mathematical ideas, not the practical construction of the device. Turing definitely has a role in the conceptualization of these things pre-war, and he has a role in the development of devices that are computer-like during the war. But he's always thinking not about the machine he's working on, but on the next machine. He's a sort of futurist, if you like. When he appeared on the BBC in 1950, he was talking not about what computers could currently do in 1950, which wasn't a great deal. He was talking about where computers might be in the future in 50, 100 years' time. We've just opened an exhibition on AI, which of course is on everybody's lips at the moment. He says, I'd like to, postulate the question, can computers think? and he was interested in both computing and neuroscience, and the idea of, in the 50s they called it building a brain, and that's foundational thinking in AI. So he definitely has a place in the AI story.
Had he lived longer, he might have done more.
Had he lived longer, he might have done more.
But we know now he had a tragic end. Basically, he was gay. The authorities found out he was gay and prosecuted him. And it didn't end well. He took his own life, by all accounts. Do you believe that's what happened?
I try to keep an open mind. I mean, the coroner's report says suicide. So that's what officially happened to him. His mother never believed he killed himself. She believed it was an accident. There are people in the dark corners of the internet that think he was murdered by the CIA, which is nonsense. But whether it was accidental or deliberate, we don't know. We do know that he was killed by cyanide poisoning, but he had cyanide in his house. He was doing some alarmingly dangerous chemical experiments in his spare bedroom. So
we don't know.
We don't know.
The truth is, it was very sad, and that we as a society didn't treat him well at all, given that he was a hero, or he should have been claimed as a hero.
Well, the thing is, at the time, he was an obscure Manchester mathematician. All of the work that Bletchley Park had done remained secret. He was probably still consulting for GCHQ, but again, all secret. Interestingly, at his trial, both Max Newman and Hugh Alexander, who was still at GCHQ, appear as character witnesses for him in court. So he's not abandoned by the bits of the establishment with which he worked, who know. But obviously they can't go to Wilmslow Crown Court and say, this man is a national treasure, he helped win World War II, because that's all still secret. Yeah. All they can say is, he's a good guy.
But he did, didn't he? He helped win World War II in a massive way.
He gets singled out a huge amount, but he was also a member of a team. And there are a lot of people who did similar things. There are other mathematicians, other Cambridge mathematicians. I mean, Bill Tutt is a wonderful example, who, for various reasons, have not sort of reached the same place in the public, not been lauded in the same way. And so, yes, he achieved some unique things here, both here and in his mathematical work.
And he's now on the back of a £50 note.
Yeah, Bank of England gave us one when it came out. We had to promise not to spend it.
As you say, I mean, the more we talk to you, the more we realise there were so many other people who were brilliant and, as you say, worked as a team. And he's the name we tend to know best.
It is. But I definitely think that his was a career cut short. We would probably be talking about Turing in a very different way and about a lot of different things that he would have gone on to do. I mean, his work in biology that he was getting started in had the potential to be very interesting. He was very curious about the world around him, and his mathematical work in biology is looking at how numbers occur in nature and how things like how plants are shaped is defined by mathematics. And that's a field that has only more recently become really recognised, and I think those sorts of things he would be much better known for. It's interesting how many Bletchley Park veterans went on to be important in other fields, and Bletchley Park becomes kind of a footnote in their biography because they did all sorts of other amazing things.
And maybe that was the nature of genius, is that their brains can do other things too. We're coming up to, some very important anniversaries, clearly VE Day. Bletchley Park and its role in the success of D-Day, for instance, and in VE Day. Anything to tell us about? Any stories there?
Bletchley Park is fundamental to the success of these operations. It's not the only thing that allows the Allies to win. Obviously, people need to, run up a beach, and there's a lot of. I wouldn't want to underestimate the sacrifice of the people who actually fight the war, but the intelligence is a huge addition. And what's interesting about D-Day is that process of accumulating information piece by piece. The team here at Bletchley Park are working on the invasion of Europe 2 years before. And it's because they've been working for 2 years, working out all of the intricacies of the German armed forces in France, that when Eisenhower has to plan an invasion, he has all the information about his enemy at his fingertips. He knows exactly what he's facing. There has to be a meeting between Churchill and Roosevelt where they go, is it practical to invade Europe? If we try it, are we going to win? And you can't make a reasoned decision about that unless you know what you're facing. How many Germans are there? What tanks have they got? How good are they?
Where are they?
Where are they? And so the influence of the intelligence from here isn't only military on the battlefield, it goes right up to the political level of, can we even try to do this? It also spills over into the deception side and, persuading the German, keeping the story secret.
We were going to land at Calais.
Persuading them they're going to land at Calais, all of those things. So almost every aspect of the story, you see the fingerprints of Bletchley Park and Codebreaker and signals intelligence in there. So it is really fundamental. I'm a historian, so I rely on evidence. And when people say to me, how can you sort of characterise Bletchley Park's contribution? I'm greatly helped because General Eisenhower sent a letter to Stuart Minges, who was head of SIS at the end of the war, saying, thank you very much, basically, to the Codebreakers. And he says in his letter that the work here greatly hastened the Allied victory and saved thousands of British and American lives. And that comes from Eisenhower, so he knew what he was talking about. So it's not my opinion, it's his opinion.
Do we know anything of the atmosphere that might have been in this room, for instance, or in the huts outside on D-Day? Would they have known that D-Day was going to happen, and would they have sensed it was happening while it was happening? Would we have felt it here?
I think it would have been kind of in the ether. A lot of people, as I was saying earlier, they're not close enough to the finished intelligence product to really know what the messages are saying. So most people would have only found out about it when the papers came out in the morning. There are a few people in Hut 3 in particular who the people are producing the intelligence that's actually being sent to Eisenhower. People in Hut 3, the senior watchkeepers, would have known. Interestingly, we have an account how on the night of the 5th, they previously arranged to have a party. And the guys that knew said, well, should we cancel the party? Well, no, don't cancel the party because everyone will think something's up. So they have the party anyway. And then when the party breaks up, instead of going home to bed, the ones in the know sort of drift over to Hut 3 to see what's going on. And you've got 5,000 ships in the Channel. If the German Navy can get in amongst that, the Allies are in trouble because, if everyone was still on the ships, it would be a disaster. So they set up a special interception station here at Bletchley Park to listen to the German Navy in the Channel. And what they're doing is they're monitoring all the right frequencies so that the moment the German Navy realise what's going on, Bletchley Park will know. And so they're intercepting messages from late on the night of the 5th into the morning of the 6th. And we have copies of these in our archive where there's messages from various German naval outposts saying, oh we've seen, there's been bombers, or there's been reports of paratroops. And then another message comes back saying, the paratroops all turned out to be straw dummies, so don't worry about that. And then dawn breaks and they see ships. When there's a remarkable message that says there are indications the invasion has begun. And that's at about 5 o'clock in the morning. And that's the first time the German Navy has gone, this is it. Because they were waiting for it. They knew it was coming.
But it must have been amazing to be in that hut.
But to be in that hut.
Message was
and
decrypted.
To see those messages coming in. What's wonderful is the person who wrote the English version, their initials are on the bottom of each message. So you can see not only who wrote the message, but the female teleprinter operator who sent it by teleprint to the Admiralty, her initials are on there as well. So we do actually know who these people were sitting in the watchroom in Hut 3 or in the naval section, watching the battle unfold, in front of their eyes.
By encryption.
But by decryption in this case.
Yes.
But they are the exception. I mean, most people would find out later. I mean, there's a story of a woman who operated punch card machines down in Block C. And very dull job because they're always dealing with encrypted text. So they've basically got punch cards with gibberish on them and they manipulate them through these machines. Boxing Day 1943, the German battleship Scharnhorst was sunk off Norway. And Admiral Fraser, who was in charge, came to Bletchley to say thank you. And he walked into Hut 3 and went up to this lady and said, congratulations, you helped sink the Scharnhorst. And she's like, what? But I do this. How is this anything to do with the Navy? Because she literally didn't know. But he gave her a big hug, which you probably wouldn't get away with nowadays. But and she was like, this is fantastic. And Admiral's come to thank me for what I'm doing, even though I don't know what it is. The Admiral subsequently gave a talk here in the mansion to explain the story in more detail. But they had a ballot because not everyone could go, and she didn't get a ticket.
Oh!
So her friend went instead.
Oh, no, that's a lovely story.
And the other thing you see, we were looking at a message just yesterday, when VE Day occurs, there's this worldwide network of people with wireless sets, communicating in and out of Bletchley Park. And the war ends, and suddenly they're able to kind of communicate freely. And you see these plain text, unencrypted messages going back and forth, going, "We've won!"
Yeah.
Which is really nice.
Amazing.
What was the one yesterday? It said, "Stay drunk for days." Was what it said.
Yes, that's easy to understand. Lovely. Thank you so much. Absolutely brilliant. It's wonderful to learn about the past, but in fact the legacy of Bletchley Park goes on now into the future. Here at Bletchley, there's now an enormous exhibition about AI. I wonder what Alan Turing would have thought of that.